Fred Phlogiston. Why don't Scientologists recognize David Miscavige as a squirrel? It's a good question because from the outside, of course, we can certainly see that David Miscavige fits the definition of what a squirrel is according to Scientology. So let's talk about that. First off, there's a mindset, there's something I'd like to get across first about what how Scientologists view the world, or what their perspective is on this particular thing. There's very specific things Scientologists have to start thinking with in order to be Scientologists. One of them is that you are a spiritual entity. You just really can't be a Scientologist for very long if you don't accept that as actual literal truth. And the other thing is that there's the concept, and it's a different one, that there's a single source for Dianetics and Scientology, but also that spreads out to there is a single idea or single truth or single source of truth on any subject. There's a right way to do it. And then there's this infinity of wrong ways, and you really got to, hone in on what's the one right way. And so that leads to this idea that there is a single source for things. It's kind of an interesting idea, right? I mean, you kind of think about that for a second and go, because I think in the real world, we're pretty tuned to the fact that, sure, there might be an inventor or somebody who discovers something, but a whole bunch of people then get to work on it and expand it and advance it and come up with new revisions and new ideas from that, so it's not really a single source for, physics or algebra or even calculus at this point, right? I mean, Newton might have invented it one summer, but, people have added to it since then, right? So that's, now again, I'm not a calculus expert, but I'm just kind of throwing that out there. So anyway, that idea it's not really the same thing. In Scientology, it's a very focused idea. So in Scientology, you have this idea of source, and with a capital S, that is one of the titles L. Ron Hubbard gave himself. He said, I am source. He said, I'm the source of Dianetics and Scientology. I'm the single source of it, according to Keeping Scientology Working. But he then said, I am source. Okay, that was a title that he had. And that lasted until he died. And then David Miscavige took over. And to the mind of Scientologists, David Miscavige is now source. Now, let me explain this, because people might go, well, they still revere Hubbard. Yes, they do. But, right, there has to be this, David Miscavige is now the living representation of source, you see. Let me tell you a little bit about what goes on internally in Scientology you might not have heard about. I don't want to get into a big, long explanation of this whole organizing board and stuff, but there's a 7-division organizing board in every Scientology organization. That's how it's structured. And Division 7 is the executive division. It consists of 3 departments. One of those departments is the Department of L. Ron Hubbard, or the Office of L. Ron Hubbard. It's headed up by a person called the L. Ron Hubbard, or LRH communicator. So there's another title to that department. I don't want to get into what it's technically called. It's going to get a little confusing, but let me just say that every one of these departments not only has a name, but it has this additional thing, this additional name that's added to it that's called an awareness characteristic. And it sort of Hubbard's idea of melding the Bridge to Total Freedom with the organizing board, and he did it with these awareness characteristics. So the reason that what I'm trying to get to here is that Department 21, the Office of L. Ron Hubbard, has the awareness characteristic of source. Okay, that's what it's called. David Miscavige, internally within the C organization, is one of his titles is Department 21. That's what people call him when they're referring to him. They never call it to him to his face, but when they're talking about something coming from Department 21, there's only one guy that's referring to David Miscavige. And that was used many, 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 many times during my Scientology Sea Org career, not just a couple times. It was ubiquitous. We heard it all the time. So that's David Miscavige's identity in the Sea Org. He's source, man. So that is something that Scientologists think of when they think of David Miscavige. They think about him that way. So it would be inconceivable to think of him as a squirrel any more than it would be inconceivable to think of L. Ron Hubbard as a squirrel, because they're source. Now, to drive this home even further, right? Because a squirrel in Scientology, sorry, I never did get around to defining that. A squirrel in Scientology is somebody who alters or changes Scientology techniques and procedures in a destructive way. And they get kicked out of the church, or they leave the church and they take the technology and they use it, but they twist it and alter it and mess it up. And so they're called squirrels. Hubbard was death on these guys. He was just not down with them at all. That's why he called them squirrels. He said they're a little nutty, and just did everything he could to denigrate anybody taking his techniques or ideas and running with it and going off and doing something that he wasn't getting paid for. That's what it came down to, is the Benjamins. So that was why Hubbard labeled these people that way, and that's why, again, it would be inconceivable that Hubbard or Miscavige would ever be thought of as a squirrel. Let me tell you about one other thing here as to how this propaganda campaign is engaged and reinforced within the world of Scientology. One, if you go to the David Miscavige website or the RTC website, you start looking at how they talk about David Miscavige for the last many years. It has been that he is the successor of L. Ron Hubbard, handpicked by L. Ron Hubbard, I believe they say. He was the successor, right? So he's the guy who's carrying on the tradition of Scientology. He is the spiritual leader of Scientology, or the Scientology movement. That's how they couch this stuff, right? Those are the words that they use now to describe David Miscavige. So this absolutely is reinforcing this mindset, you see. And one last thing you might not know about is sometimes when you see Miscavige in a full dress uniform, he's only got one little award wearing here. It's a little red one with a little star. That award is something only he and I think Norman Starkey have. And I don't know that Norman Starkey even, is given the power to use it anymore. But this is what I was told when I was in. I read about this award, though. It is in writing. It wasn't just some verbal rumor line. That award David Miscavige wears comes with a card that you carry in your wallet that says on it, "The bearer of this card speaks for L. Ron Hubbard. Anything this person says is as good as L. Ron Hubbard himself saying it." Something along those lines. Definitely that idea. I don't have the issue anymore, so I can't I've never found it online, so I've never been able to pull it up and tell you exactly what it says. But basically, that was what it communicated. And when I learned about this, when I first got in the Sea Org, I was blown away that David Miscavige that this would exist, and two, that he would have it. But this was pointed out to me very early on, and I was, duly impressed. And I always kind of held on to that piece of information because it seemed kind of important. This is one of the reasons why, right? Is because you would never think of him as a squirrel. So that is why Scientologists don't think about him that way. And thanks for the question.